everyone. Welcome to another episode of the First 90%. We are so excited to have Zara Kadir join us today. She is the founder of the Therapy Shed. And welcome, Zara, to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Zara, before we get started, if you could let our audience know what exactly you do, what is your background like, so that we can all get to know you a little bit better, and then we can get started from there.
Sure. So my official title is psychotherapist. So that covers children, teenagers, adults and families. So child, adolescent and family psychotherapist. I also do EMDR, which is a kind of trauma-focused therapy. I do art and play therapy with children. And then the Therapy Shed on Instagram is geared onto supporting parents with strategies that they can implement to manage behaviour at home.
So, in 2024, a few years from the pandemic, what are the most commonly raised issues by parents? What are parents coming to you with? What are the problems that they are mostly facing?
So most parents struggle with managing their responses to their children's big feelings. I think, we're very much a generation of parents who are realizing, actually, my parents didn't teach me how to manage anger. So when I'm met with my child's anger, I just get angry in response and then everyone's angry. So most of it's managing things like tantrums, a lot of separation anxiety, and kind of anxiety in general are the most common ones.
And so this is something that every parent struggles with, right? I am a parent, and obviously I run the company Raising Superstars, where we see a lot of parents. And this is something that every parent has a problem with. But at what point do they think that it's necessary to see an expert like yourself to seek professional help?
I think it's when they find themselves feeling disconnected from their children, or just feeling further and further away from the kind of parent that they want to be.
And is it a certain age that this happens?
So I think the typical age group of parents that I work with tends to be the younger end. So I, as a therapist, would only do play therapy with a child from the age of 4 and up. But to be honest, when it comes to children, I think I have never met a child who has a problem out of nowhere. It's typically indicative of something within the family system that's not quite working. So I would always work with parents of any age, any child that comes to see me for therapy. I would still say, let's work with the parents to change things at home as well. But parents of children with kind of tantrums and anxiety tends to be typically from about 3 to 8 years.
Got it. Also, these days, we, at least at our end, we see a lot of parents being worried about their little babies and toddlers being addicted to screens. And also that itself causing a lot of other issues. What is your view on exposure to screen time, especially in newborn babies, toddlers, and what kind of problems can they cause?
I think that there is a lot of misinformation around screen time specifically, that even just this term kind of phone addiction, there is actually, kind of scientists and neuroscientists and all the research in that field, they have not concluded that there is such a thing as phone addiction, because arguably a very specific symptom of addiction would be feeling worse when you gave that thing up. And I think we could probably all say, if we gave up our phones, we would probably feel better, not worse. So I think it's really important that parents kind of realize that phone addiction isn't necessarily a thing. It's very much pop psychology. They're habitual. Again, in terms of the kind of, we're all told about the dopamine hit that we get from likes on Instagram and stuff. And actually the dopamine hit you get from Instagram is it's kind of more in line with the dopamine hit you would get from having some chocolate. It's not the same as taking cocaine.
Yeah.
So I think that the first thing I would say to parents is actually don't panic. The guidelines that were brought in around things like no screen time at all for children under the age of 2, those guidelines came in before Netflix, before apps specifically for children. So it would be a bit like us trying to follow guidelines from Victorian times. The current guidelines actually haven't necessarily been updated. There is also not a lot of information to support that screen time is damaging for children's brains or causes issues with attention. What we do know is that it is not a replacement for face-to-face, person-to-person communication. So if you're hoping that your child is going to learn to speak from watching something on TV, that's not the case. But you can use it as a form of bonding. So, if you're watching TV with your child and you talk about what you're seeing, then it's actually a form of connection with them. It's when you continually use a TV in place of person-to-person interaction that you run into issues. So I think, as a mum, sometimes you want to have a shower, and the easiest thing to do is to put your child in front of the TV while you have a shower. And if you're giving your kid all of the best parenting you can, but they watch a couple of hours of TV a day, it doesn't undo all of the good stuff. If you're neglecting them and it's all they get, that's very different.
Right. So I think the point that you're trying to make is that parents do not need to panic, and they don't need to put a lot of self-blame in terms of. But I think one thing that I have seen is that when we sort of give that leeway to parents, is when it starts to become a slippery slope, right? And then people might just pick up that one sentence, oh, somebody said that screen time is okay, and they didn't hear the rest of it, that it's not a replacement for one-on-one interaction, for the bonding, all of the other amazing things that you must do as a parent. And then the screen time becomes literally like a babysitter for the baby, and then there are issues with cognition and speech delays, etc. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that it's, parenting guilt is pervasive, and the best parents in the world still struggle with it. So I think it's about striking the balance. In England, at least, once children get to a certain age, they have to go to school, and the kids who are behind on things, school will kind of do their best effort to bring them up to speed. So, yes, we do have to be aware. And I think that it's important as well to think about the way we model. So I kind of sometimes ask myself, I have a 5.5-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I think to myself, if my 5-year-old had a phone now, would I be happy if he used it as much as I use mine? And if the answer is no, then I think, right, well, then I need to do something to check myself. So I think it's important to think about your relationship with technology and what you're modeling and what you're expecting from your children.
Yeah, I think that's like a fantastic point, right? Because children model what they see, and in terms of not just like screen time, but every kind of behavior. And that actually leads me to another question, which is what do you think are the most important skills that maybe like a 4-year or a 5-year-old child should be developing at that age? So I'm talking not about like hard skills like reading and math, but in terms of softer skills, what are the skills that parents should model so that their kids start developing those skills?
Yeah.
Or those
So
aspects of their personality or character, not necessarily skills.
Yeah. So I think at 4 to 5, that's when we start to see the beginning of theory of mind. So that is the ability for a child to put themselves in someone else's shoes and to feel true empathy. And it's really interesting because whenever I do a post on Instagram about how children can't really empathize before the age of 4 or 5, I get all these parents saying, like, my 1-year-old is empathetic. And actually what's going on at that point is it's mirror neurons. When they see someone else crying, then mirror neurons are activated and they cry. The same way a baby that's 6 hours old might stick their tongue out if you stick yours out, because it's mirror neurons. So they have a sort of empathy, but it's not true empathy. And children that are very young, they're very, very ego driven. So for example, if you go into the supermarket and they see like a wall full of candy bars, they genuinely think, well, if that candy's not for me, who is it for? All they think about is the way the world affects them. And once they get to 4 or 5, they start to think about the way other people experience the world. And I actually saw an amazing example of this with my son when he was kind of between 4 and 5. Because he calls his grandparents Gaga and Zeta. And normally he would just say to everyone, like, oh, my Gaga's coming today, assuming that, because he knows what Gaga means, they also know. But then I saw him one day say to his friend, my grandma's coming to see me today. And I thought, oh my God, he's got it. he's seen that that kid won't know what gaga means, and he's translated it so he can understand, and so he's got theory of mind. And I think in that specific age, 4 to 5, that's when I would really start to think about the way I model self-regulation, the way I model kindness, the way I treat people around me, because he's really going to start absorbing that. And like, you know, so I was in the supermarket yesterday, and this teenager was about to buy a donut, and then he realized his phone had run out of battery, and so he couldn't use his like Apple Pay. And so I just said to him, I was like, give me the donut, I'll buy you the donut. And I thought, you know, my son needs to see that actually kindness to strangers is really important. So I think, yeah, 4 to 5 is when I would really be thinking about empathy and kindness and how our actions affect other people.
And do you think that role modeling these behaviors are the best way to teach empathy and kindness? Because you're absolutely, I would say the same thing, right? Empathy and kindness are probably the right up there in terms of what they should be developing. But is that the best strategy to do it? Or is there anything else that you suggest that parents can do?
So I think, yeah, modelling is always the first step, because children are just far more likely to do what they see as opposed to doing what they're told.
Yeah.
So I kind of think, you know, we have to be the blueprint for, be the person that you want your child to be. Because, you know, if you scream at your child every time that they get upset about something, and then you're upset that they scream at you, you know, whenever parents say to me that their kids roll their eyes at them, I always say, well, who have they seen rolling their eyes? You know, they didn't just make it up. They've learned it somewhere. So I think modelling is very important. And then I think it's about asking your children the questions that you want them to ask themselves one day. So for example, the typical one is, you know, with siblings or with friends, when parents go, say you're sorry. And actually, I would say there's no point in that, because then they're just saying sorry because they've been told to. It's about teaching them what an apology means and what an apology does for another person, and actually what an apology does for you. And I always think of sorry as this thing that rises up inside you, and you have to give it away in order to feel better. So if my son's done something that someone didn't like, then I wouldn't just say to him, look, give it back and say you're sorry. I would say, they look a bit sad because they had that toy and now they don't. I wonder what you could do. And then it makes him think, what could I do? What am I seeing? And it's about asking them the questions that you want them to ask themselves.
That's a amazing sort of tactic that parents can take from you. In terms of, you touched upon siblings, right? In terms of when parents have to manage 2 kids, sometimes more than 2 kids, and they're fighting. Now, somebody asked me this. I think maybe like a couple of days ago, a parent asked me, how do you manage that? Not from the child's point of view, but from the parent's point of view. How do you deal with siblings fighting, having their own rivalries and competition? How do you deal with that?
I think that it's quite multifaceted. So I would say the first thing is, from the day your second child is born, that you never compare them, even in a positive way. So, you know, my son was 4.5 when his sister was born, and I never ever said, you never cried like this when you were a baby, because in his mind that immediately makes him think, oh, we're being compared, even though it's technically a positive comparison I'm making. Because as soon as you compare them, you set them against each other. So I made sure to kind of never do anything like that. I also made sure to try and level the playing field. Obviously, she was a very small baby and her needs were very high. So sometimes, even when she was sleeping, I would just say to her, like, so her name's Lonnie and my son is called Bo. So I'd say, hang on a minute, Lonnie, I've got to get something for Bo first, so that he didn't only ever hear, Bo, you have to wait, Lonnie needs me. I would kind of try and level the playing field, even if I just made it up. And then it's about not using yourself as the kind of the bait, really, because what happens is, when children know that when we fight, mum comes in, acts as a referee, then you're giving them all of your attention for the behaviour that actually you don't want. And, you know, when my sister and I were young, we were squabbling in the back of the car, and my parents did the kind of classic thing of the time, and they kicked us out of the car, not very far from home. But they're like, right, you can walk then. And as soon as there was no parents around, my sister stopped, you know, trying to kill me, and immediately was like, right, come on, let's go, and took me home. because she was older than me. So if you remove yourself, your children will very quickly start collaborating. So it's about being a narrator for what you see, but not being a referee. So if your children are fighting, you don't come in and go, stop doing that to your brother, that's horrible, you know, he's younger than you should be kind to him. You just go in and go, oh, he looks sad, I wonder what's going on. And then inevitably they say, like, well, he had this toy and then I wanted it and it was my turn and he wasn't sharing. So then I would reflect back, like, okay, let me make sure I've got this right. So you had it and it was your turn, so you took it. And they go, yeah. And then they would carry on. And then I would probably get to a point where I would say, okay, well, you're both really, really bright kids. I'm really looking forward to hearing what kind of solutions you have for how you can both have this toy. And as soon as you start labeling children or, you know, siding with one, then it just becomes more and more of an enticing thing for them to do to draw you in. But actually, the older they get, the more I would say, like, oh, I'm sorry that you've got a problem. I'm going to leave the room for 10 minutes and see what you come up with. You know, don't make yourself the bait.
Yeah, so let them handle it on their own, right?
Yeah,
figure it
and
out
just
yourself.
offer them again. Yeah, offer them some skills to kind of work out what's going on. But, you know, obviously in the extreme cases where children are being very physically aggressive with each other, sometimes you have to go in and you have to separate them and say, like, okay, I'm taking the toy, I have it now, neither of you do. Right, you go to your room, you go to your room, I'm going to come to you both in time. And you go in and you just kind of separate.
Yeah. In terms of tantrums in little kids, right? Like little as in maybe like 2-3 year olds. Sometimes parents just are forced to give up and just accept whatever the toddler wants. But what's the best strategy? Because that ultimately leads to the toddler learning that, okay, if I throw a tantrum, then I get what I want, right? But then it's also about managing the peace of mind for the parent. So what's the best strategy there to manage toddler tantrums?
So, where do I start? So with tantrums, I think it's another one of those things when a lot of parents will tell me that their children are manipulative. And actually, again, in terms of kind of brain development, it takes a very, very complex level of brain development to be able to deliberately manipulate someone. So if your child wants to manipulate you, they have to plan ahead. They have to imagine a future version of themselves. They have to imagine the way you will react as a parent in the future. And then they have to stay regulated while they carry out this master plan that they've created. And none of those things are possible. What children do learn is cause and effect. So when I kick and scream, my mum gives me what I want. They're not manipulative, but they're clever. So I think that it's always important to reward the behaviour you want instead of punishing the behaviour you don't want. So in a very small child, like the example you've given, they're not choosing to have a tantrum to irritate you and get their way. They're actually using the only tools that they have, which is that they get overwhelmed very quickly and they're signalling to you that I need connection, I need help, I'm dysregulated. And you can't regulate a child if you're dysregulated yourself. So the first thing I would always do as a mum is address how I feel. Because, you know, if a child is if they're in the supermarket and they're screaming and it hurts your ears, or if they're physically throwing at you or throwing themselves at you, you know, you're a person before you're a parent, and it's everyone's instinctive reaction to kind of defend themselves or shout back. So the first thing I would do would be to just take a deep breath, because as soon as you start to regulate your central nervous system, your children will co-regulate. So I would take a breath, and then I would think something to myself like, am I feeling empathy? Because if I'm not feeling empathy towards my child, it's going to be harder. And if I'm not, then I would think, why am I not feeling empathy? And then I would remind myself, okay, they're doing the best that they can with the tools that they have. My child is 3. I am a grown-up, so I cannot act like a 3-year-old. And then what's the next best thing I can do to help this situation improve instead of adding some more fire to this fire? And then I would always keep it very, very simple. So not lots of words, because a really dysregulated child doesn't want to hear a lecture. They don't want to hear loads of instructions. They don't want to be given loads of choices. So it'd be something like I would get down on their level and I would say, you're feeling really angry inside. Let me help you. Or I would say something as simple as, you're safe. And I would just keep it really simple, because it's only once they've started to calm down that you can then think about your next steps. And the next step, again, needs to be really simple. So, okay, Do you want to walk to the car or do you want to be carried? Like this or that? And then just really slowly getting them back on side and actually just remembering that you're on the same page, you're a team, you both want to have a nice time together.
Right. I think that's a really, really complicated sort of situation for most parents. But listening to you, it seems like it's almost a very simple way to handle the situation rather than, getting worked up about it.
Yeah, I mean, I took my son somewhere the other day, and there was a woman who was quite heavily pregnant, and she had maybe a 2.5, 3 year old who just desperately wanted to be carried, and I just saw this mum get more and more angry, saying to her daughter, "I can't carry you. I'm not giving you any more cuddles," and kind of walking ahead of her. And I thought, oh my God, all you need to do is kneel down and say, "It's so sad that I can't carry you. Do you want to hold my right hand or my left hand?" And then it would have been over. I'm so. And it just went on, and the child got more and more worked up. And I just thought, oh my God, just offer her one of your hands and it will be over.
Do you have those situations quite often where you're like in a public setting and you're like, okay, I should probably give them some advice? Is that common for
It's
you?
hard. Yeah, I mean, I sometimes think it would be a really good TV show if I could just hang around playgrounds and help parents get their kids out. But yeah, it is hard. And I think, in those moments, not very many people want unsolicited advice from a stranger. But it is hard sometimes.
Has it happened before where you have given unsolicited advice and people are like, who are you?
I've had moments before where maybe I've been interacting with someone's child a little bit, and so as it's getting time to go, I kind of say a few things to help the progress of them getting out of the playground, for example, and the parents don't necessarily notice what I'm doing.
I see. So, two key things that people struggle with, parents struggle with when they come to us, is sleep and nutrition, right? So my baby or my toddler is not sleeping or is always tired. And also, what should I do if they're not eating? I feel like my child is not eating enough. Uh, any thoughts on these two issues?
So I think with eating, often, kind of infant nutrition and genuine feeding issues and feeding issues around neurodivergence is a very specific field that I don't really dabble in. But I think that quite often when you say to a parent, give me a list of all the foods that they eat, they immediately realise it's a lot more than they thought. I think as well, it's always really important, to remember that children's bodies are really efficient at absorbing nutrients. So if they're not eating loads of meat or fish, bread has protein in it. And if their bodies needs protein, they'll get it from bread, I think also that I certainly take with small children, a 48 to 36 hour view. So if they have a really good breakfast, they might not have a really good till dinner the next day. And that's also really normal. I think, children are born intuitive eaters and we get in the way of it by saying, please eat this, please finish that, or no, you can't have this. And actually, if they're hungry, they will eat. And you just have to sometimes trust in their bodies. It's a really important thing to not give negative attention. So if they realise that by refusing to eat, they can get all of your attention, then they're going to continue to do it more. So, my son was, he's not a particularly adventurous eater. But whenever I want him to try something, I don't say, here, try this. I put it on his plate and I just kind of say, explore this. And he goes, I licked it. I'm like, great. Or he goes, I played with it. Brilliant. These are all the ways that you can engage with food. And I gave him a cheese string, which is like this cheese that you peel into strips. And I just gave it to him and I was like, can you make this look like an octopus for me? And just like watched him peel it. And then the next time I did it, I gave it to him and he didn't know I was watching him. And I just saw him take this tiny little nibble. And then he came in and said, Mummy, I tried it. And, you have to let them explore in their own way and just take the pressure off. Unless they are only eating a tiny, tiny select number of things, you probably don't need to worry.
Any thoughts on sleep routines as well? I think, by the way, this was super fascinating, right? All the points that you said that take a view of 36 to 48 hours. If you make a list, then it's probably too much. let them explore, take the pressure off. So all of those points are absolutely fascinating, which as a normal parent you wouldn't realize, right? Um, but
Yeah.
any thoughts on sleep? Is it similar with sleep that babies are just getting enough sleep, but parents are just overly stressing out about it, or is there anything
I
to
mean,
worry about?
with small babies, I wouldn't be able to comment on the sleep needs of small babies in a professional capacity. It would only be as a mum, and I know that um, that again, yeah, like every child is different, and if they're not getting enough sleep, then obviously that's an issue. But if they're just not getting as much as you'd like, then maybe that's a parent problem, not a child problem. The kind of area of
Hmm.
sleep that I would deal with is typically like bedtime separation anxiety. So children that want someone to lie with them until they fall asleep. Um, and there's loads of different things around that you can do. Like quite often, I think it's about reminding them that they're safe. So again, with my son, I lie with him for a few minutes and then I say to him, your bed is safe, your house is safe, mummy loves you. And I try not to say anything like good night or anything that's too finite. I say, sleep well, or I'll see you in the morning, and
Hmm.
remind him of when we're going to be reunited. Sometimes I do things like we'd count how many steps it is from his bed to my bed to remind him of how short that distance is. Um, and sometimes it's about role playing it. So, during the day, you get them into their pajamas and you get them to pretend to lie in bed and go to sleep by themselves and give them the chance to like rehearse the thing that they're worried about.
Right. Um, so I wanted to ask there, in terms of milestones in babies and toddlers, right? Is what in your experience, what are things that parents should be mindful of, and at what point does it become something to be worried about in terms of
Mm.
a child meeting milestones? Because the reason I'm asking is not to sort of scare people, but I think a lot of parents
Mm-hmm.
get overly worried, right? And
Mm.
is there something that we can do to address those worries and sort of say that it's okay and maybe there is nothing to worry about as such? So
Yeah.
at what are the things that parents are overly worried about in your experience, and at what point does it require them to maybe seek help or see a doctor?
So I think that comparison's the thief of joy, and I remember my son was quite verbal quite early on, and I remember the amount of times that I'd be in the playground with him, and I'd have this kind of worried mum next to me, like,
Okay.
how old is he? How come his vocabulary is like that? And I would just be like, he's just, this isn't because of anything magic I've done. This is just who he is. So when we look at a lot of the kind of the averages that we're given as parents. So when you
Hmm.
look at the average amount of sleep that a baby might need,
Hmm.
with things like sleep and with things like food, they will have monitored hundreds, thousands of babies, and then from that taken an average number. But within that sample, there would have been babies, newborns who slept for 22 hours out of 24, and newborns who slept for 10 hours. And both of them were normal, but they took this average number, and then parents go, oh my God, my child's not in the average. But actually, they probably, normal is a very broad range. I think from my side of things, the things that I would look for are if you have a child who is non-verbal past the age of kind of 2, if you have a child who is 7 and still having massive tantrums, those are the things that I would flag. Um, Children who are suffering with huge amounts of anxiety, because that's quite often an indicator of some kind of neurodivergence. Um, and still being very physical and aggressive in their behavior once they get past kind of maybe 4. I would expect to see that. With tantrums specifically, they tend to start around 14 to 18 months, peak between 2 to 3, and then 3, 4, 5 you should start to see them diminish a bit.
Got it. So we would like to talk a little bit about your sort of professional experience, professional life. What is it that you most enjoy about what you do?
um I love seeing parents feeling like they've got a plan. I love those moments where I see those kind of moments of epiphany in a parent where they go, oh, yeah, no, I do that. Because quite often when they start to explain their child's behaviour, I might say, I'm just going to hazard a guess here that maybe you say X, Y, Z, and that's why they're doing this thing. And there's moments where I can start to unravel the cause of a behaviour and give a parent something really straightforward they can do. I love that. Sometimes I get these amazing moments from Instagram where parents say like, oh, me and a group of mums that go to gymnastics on Saturday all follow you, and we all say to ourselves, what would Zara do? And that's amazing to imagine. I'm like in people's heads. So I love those moments. And then with kids, I've seen, I love working with children and adults, and I've seen some incredible journeys of adults who are pathological people pleasers suddenly become liberated and start living the lives that they wanted, or children who were beside themselves with anxiety and all of a sudden are sleeping better and sleeping independently and doing things and talking about their feelings in a much more complex way. And there's so many things I love about my job. I feel very lucky to do it.
In terms of what you're seeing in London and in England specifically, in terms of families, right? Are parents more worried about their own freedom and independence and their own life, or are they more worried about having that bond within the family and the relationship with the children?
I would probably say the latter. Parents are very focused on not wanting to be disconnected from their children, or lots of parents worrying that they've kind of caused irreparable damage because once they shouted at their child, But then I also see the other side of things where I see parents who are just struggling because they're like, I can't go to the toilet by myself and I don't get a single second and I don't have any help, I don't have grandparents around. So I see both sides of things. But I'd say in general parents here are very, very concerned with their children having an outlet. So lots of parents say, 8, 9, 10-year-olds say, I want to go and speak to someone about my worries.
And what are your final thoughts for parents who might be watching this show?
So I think that a lot of parents that come to me and want therapy for their children, I actually put myself out of a job and I say your child doesn't need therapy, they just need you to manage their behaviour differently. And there's loads of lovely quotes, and one of my favourite ones is, see a child differently and you'll see a different child. So I think if you don't have the relationship with your child that you want, or if you're not quite the parent that you want to be, then remember that parenting isn't a job, it's a relationship. And if you're not seeing the child that you want to see, then you need to look at yourself and then start taking small steps to being the parent that you want to be. But it doesn't happen overnight. And you were a person before you were a parent, and sometimes the person reacts first, and that's fine too.
So I think we will end with that amazing quote: see your child differently and you will see a different child. Thank you so much, Zara Kadir, for joining us on the show. It was an absolute pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much.